Good evening, dear listeners. I am Lady Ravenswood, and it is a true pleasure to welcome you back to my drawing room, where the fire is warm and the most remarkable stories come to life. Tonight, we find ourselves transported to London in the spring of 1821, a time of blossoming flowers, hopeful hearts, and dreams of future happiness. Yet, for one young woman, it's a time of heartbreak, public shame, and an uncertain future. This is the story of Miss Arabella Hartwell, whose life was turned upside down just days before her wedding to the charming and wealthy Viscount Peton. The wedding should have been the event of the season. But just days before the grand occasion, Arabella received a letter that would change everything. It was from Viscount Peton, the man she was to marry, the man she had believed would be her future. In the letter, he graciously explained that he could no longer marry her due to his financial circumstances. In an instant, her dreams of a beautiful wedding, a perfect life, came crashing down. She was 22 years old, heartbroken, and left to face the gossip of London society. What would they say? Arabella could feel the whispers of pity as soon as she stepped outside. Her world, once filled with joy, had become a place of judgment and shame. But Arabella, strong and composed, made a decision. She would tell the truth. She would not hide behind falsehoods. She was not broken. She was not defeated. And so, she walked into the storm of gossip with her head held high. But little did Arabella know, her story was about to take a turn. 3 days after the scandal, a man named Gabriel Sinclair, the newly titled Earl of Ashbourne, knocked on the Hartwell door. He had heard of Arabella's misfortune, and he had a proposition, a practical one. Would she consider marriage to him? Not for love, not for affection, but for mutual benefit. He had debts. She had a dowry. Together, they might find a way to rebuild their lives, even if that meant starting a marriage born from necessity. Would Arabella agree to such a proposal? Or would she refuse, holding out for the life she had once imagined? Let's find out together. Shall we proceed to the next part of this unexpected tale? Arabella Hartwell was no stranger to the weight of society's expectations. As a young woman, she had been raised to dream of the perfect marriage, a partnership filled with romance, respect, and mutual affection. But after Viscount Peton's abandonment, those dreams lay shattered at her feet, like broken glass too sharp to step over. When Gabriel Sinclair, the new Earl of Ashbourne, entered her life with his proposition, Arabella was wary. She had heard of him only in passing, whispers of his inheritance, his family's vast debts, and the heavy burden he now carried. His brother, the previous Earl, had been a notorious gambler whose actions had nearly ruined the family. Gabriel was left to pick up the pieces, facing a financial disaster that seemed impossible to undo. Yet there he was, standing before Arabella's father, with a proposal that was simple, if not unconventional. Gabriel, in his calm, direct manner, explained that their union would be one of practicality. Arabella's dowry could ease his financial burdens, and in return she would gain a title, a home, and perhaps most importantly, freedom from the pity of London society. No grand declarations of love, no promises of romance. Just a mutual arrangement where both would find stability. Arabella, though stunned, couldn't help but admire his honesty. Unlike Viscount Peton, who had abandoned her with excuses and no explanation, Gabriel was offering a clear, no-nonsense path forward. Arabella, in a moment of clarity, realized that perhaps this was her chance to rebuild her life, to forge a future that, while not born of passion, could be grounded in respect and shared purpose. And so, with the weight of her family's reputation pressing on her shoulders, Arabella agreed to the proposal. No grand wedding, no dreams of fairy tale romance, just the quiet promise of two people choosing to make the best of their circumstances. "Very well, my lord," she said softly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I accept your proposal." And with that, Arabella and Gabriel's unconventional journey together began. Arabella's decision to marry Gabriel Sinclair wasn't an easy one. It felt more like a practical arrangement than the start of any romantic adventure. The wedding was small and understated, a stark contrast to the grand celebration that had been planned for her original nuptials. Only their closest family members attended, and Arabella wore a simple morning dress of pale blue silk, packing away the beautiful wedding gown, she had once hoped to wear to a different future. As she stood before Gabriel, repeating her vows with a steady voice, Arabella couldn't help but glance at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was composed, dignified, though the glances of a few pitying guests lingered in the room. There was no romance in the air, only duty and practicality. Gabriel placed the ring upon her finger with the same calm detachment, his lips barely brushing hers when he lifted her veil to bestow the traditional kiss. The kiss felt more like a formal gesture than the tender act it was meant to be. After the ceremony, they departed for Ashbourne Park, the estate Gabriel had inherited, leaving London, and its whispers, behind. The journey was quiet, the carriage rattling over cobblestones. And Arabella felt the weight of her decision settle heavily on her shoulders. She was now married to a man she barely knew, a man who had been a stranger only days before. And the silence between them was deafening. Gabriel, however, appeared to be lost in his own thoughts, attending to his correspondence and ledgers, not attempting to engage in conversation beyond what was necessary. For Arabella, this was a far cry from the romance she had once dreamed of. Instead, it was a quiet journey into the unknown. A journey where she wasn't quite sure what the future would hold. But she also knew that, in some ways, it was better than the alternative, a life defined by gossip, shame, and loneliness. As they arrived at Ashbourne Park, Arabella felt a mixture of awe and unease. The house was grand, yes, but it was in dire need of repair, much like their marriage. Gabriel led her through the front doors, and the air inside the manor was heavy with the scent of stale beeswax and old paper. The grandeur of the estate had faded over the years, and the neglected state of it mirrored the emotional void that had existed in their marriage since the ceremony. But there was something about the house, the possibility of restoring it, that stirred a glimmer of hope within her. Gabriel, ever the realist, spoke quietly, acknowledging the work that lay ahead. "It wants work," he said. "Rather a lot of work, I am afraid. But the bones are sound. With proper attention, it could be beautiful again." Arabella looked up at the weathered stone facade, her heart heavy with the weight of their situation, but determined nonetheless. "Then we shall have to provide that attention, shall we not?" she replied, her voice filled with a quiet resolve. And so the restoration of Ashbourne Park began, not just the house but perhaps in time their marriage as well. The first weeks at Ashbourne Park were a blur of hard work, practical decisions, and long days filled with repairs and meetings. Arabella threw herself into the task of managing the estate with a determination she hadn't known she possessed. Each morning, she met with the housekeeper to go over the day's tasks, and in the afternoons, she toured the estate with the steward, discussing everything from crop rotations to roof repairs. By evening, she could be found poring over ledgers and accounts by candlelight, making sense of the financial chaos Gabriel had inherited. Gabriel, for his part, was equally dedicated to restoring the estate. His responsibilities as the new Earl had left him with little room for anything other than work, and he too was focused on getting things back in order. Arabella admired his quiet determination. In some strange way, their shared commitment to Ashbourne Park allowed them to work side by side. Their conversations mostly limited to the daily tasks that needed attention. There were no grand gestures, no romantic evenings by the fire. Instead, they labored together, each doing their part to make the estate livable again. One afternoon, as they stood together in the east pasture surveying the fencing that needed replacement, Gabriel spoke to her for the first time with a hint of gratitude in his voice. "I must thank you," he said, looking over at her, "for not weeping, for not making this arrangement more difficult than it need be, for simply getting on with what needs doing." Arabella paused, surprised by the sincerity in his words. "You believe I feel no pain?" she asked quietly. "No disappointment." Gabriel's gray eyes met hers, steady and intense. "I believe you feel a great deal, but you do not inflict it upon others. That requires considerable strength of character." Arabella's heart tightened at his words. She had never considered herself particularly strong, but perhaps there was more to her than even she had realized. And so, over the weeks that followed, their relationship began to shift. There were moments when their conversations ventured beyond the mundane tasks of estate management. They discussed books, art, politics, and even laughed together over small misadventures. One afternoon, While reviewing the granary logs, Gabriel accidentally knocked an inkwell off the desk. As the ink spilled, he froze, looking guilty. But instead of scolding him, Arabella burst into laughter. At first, Gabriel was taken aback, but soon he joined her. It was a rusty sound, but genuine, and for the first time, Arabella realized that there might be something more to their partnership than they had both imagined. As the weeks passed, the walls between them began to lower. They were no longer just two people bound by necessity. They were partners, working side by side, learning to appreciate one another's strengths. Arabella found herself looking at Gabriel differently, not as a stranger who had offered her a lifeline, but as a man who was becoming someone she could respect, someone who, like her, was doing the best he could in a difficult situation. One evening, while sitting by the fire, Gabriel asked her about her life before Ashbourne Park. Arabella, hesitant at first, shared stories of her childhood, her hopes for a different life, and the heartbreak she had experienced when Viscount Peton had jilted her. Gabriel listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. There was no pity in his gaze, only understanding. "I did not expect this," Gabriel said quietly, his voice filled with a soft sincerity. "I did not expect to find a partner in you. Someone who is as capable and as strong as you are." Arabella smiled softly, the warmth of the fire reflecting in her eyes. "Nor did I," she replied. "But perhaps this is how things were meant to be." And so, their journey together continued. Not with the grand gestures of fairy tales, but with the quiet moments of partnership, respect, and shared work that would slowly, but surely, build a life together. 2 months into their marriage, life at Ashbourne Park had become a steady routine. The house was slowly being restored, and with each passing day, Arabella and Gabriel grew more accustomed to their partnership. They worked side by side, made decisions together, and shared a quiet understanding that had not been there before. Despite the lack of traditional romance, something was beginning to blossom between them. It wasn't immediate, nor was it dramatic. It was subtle, but it was real. One afternoon, Arabella received a letter from London. The Viscount Peton, the man who had once been her fiancé, had ended his engagement to another wealthy woman, and the letter detailed the scandal of her elopement with her music master. Arabella felt no bitterness, no anger, only a deep, distant pity for the man who had abandoned her. She had long since moved past the heartbreak he had caused her. Gabriel, ever observant, noticed her reaction and asked gently, "Does it wound you to know he failed as spectacularly as he feared you might?" Arabella paused, looking at the letter in her hand. "No," she said honestly. "I feel nothing for him at all anymore." "Is that terrible?" Gabriel's voice was filled with a quiet protectiveness. "It is healthy, Arabella. He does not deserve your continued affection. A man who could abandon you 3 days before your wedding is not worthy of your regard." Arabella met his gaze, surprised by the fierceness of his tone. "You barely know me, my lord." "I know you better than he ever did," Gabriel replied. "I have watched you work tirelessly to restore my family's estate. I have seen your strength in the face of hardship. I have watched you solve problems, calm difficult tenants, and bring light to the darkest corners of this house. I have heard you sing when you think no one is listening." Arabella's breath caught in her chest. She had never imagined that Gabriel would see her so clearly. But as he spoke, she realized that their relationship had transformed in ways she had not fully understood. They were no longer two strangers bound by duty. They were two people who had come to truly know and appreciate each other. "I may not have courted you properly, Arabella," Gabriel continued softly, "but I have come to know you, and what I know, I respect deeply." Tears filled Arabella's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of something much sweeter. The loneliness she had once felt began to fade, replaced by something she had never expected: love. Before she could speak, there was a knock on the door. The butler entered, his voice formal as he announced, "My lord, my lady, Viscount Peton has arrived and requests an audience. He says the matter is urgent." Arabella's heart sank. Gabriel's expression hardened, and he rose slowly from his chair. "Show him in," he said coldly, his voice carrying a quiet menace. "But remain within earshot." As Viscount Peton strode into the drawing room, Arabella felt a rush of memories, of the life she had once imagined with him, of the future that had been so carelessly ripped away. But as she watched him standing before her, she felt no anger, no longing. He was nothing to her now. He had chosen a different path, and in doing so he had set her free. "I have made a terrible mistake," Viscount Peton said, his voice full of desperation. "I should never have ended our engagement. I was a fool, blinded by greed. But I see now that I made a mistake. Please, Arabella, come back to me. You are wasting away in this rustic exile. Let me rescue you from this poverty." Gabriel stepped forward, his voice calm but lethal. "You will address my wife as Lady Ashbourne. You will acknowledge my presence in my own drawing room. And you will never again suggest that she owes you anything." Viscount Peton sneered, shaking his head. "You married her for her dowry. Everyone knows it." Gabriel's response was as calm as ever. "Yes, I married her for her dowry. I told her so with complete honesty, which is more than you ever offered. But I also married her because I saw in her a strength of character, intelligence, and grace under pressure that you were too blind to value. And in the months since, I have discovered that what began as necessity has become something far more valuable." Arabella stood beside Gabriel, her heart swelling with something she had never expected. "I think Lord Ashbourne has said everything necessary, my lord," she said, her voice steady. "I shall add only this. You did me the greatest favor of my life when you ended our engagement. You saved me from a marriage to a man who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. I thought my heart was broken when you jilted me. I was wrong. My heart was freed." Viscount Peton, his face twisted in contempt, turned on his heel and stormed out of the room. Neither Gabriel nor Arabella watched him go. They had both moved beyond him, beyond the life that might have been. Gabriel turned to Arabella, his eyes softening as he approached her. "Arabella," he whispered, "I did not plan this. I did not expect it. But somewhere between the ledgers and the laughter, between fixing fences and futures, I fell in love with you." Tears spilled from Arabella's eyes, but these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. The kiss they shared was not just a formality. It was a kiss of two people who had found something real, something deep and lasting, through the trials of life. It was the kiss of a man who had discovered love in the most unexpected place, and a woman who had learned that sometimes, love grows not in the grand gestures, but in the quiet moments of partnership. As they parted, Arabella smiled through her tears. "What a scandal we shall cause," she said with a soft laugh. "The jilted bride and the desperate earl actually falling in love with each other." "Let them talk," Gabriel said, brushing a tear from her cheek. "We have work to do. An estate to restore, a marriage to build, a future to create together." And so, as spring flowers bloomed despite years of neglect, Arabella and Gabriel began again, side by side, not as strangers bound by necessity, but as partners who had built something far more valuable than they could have ever imagined. Underscore 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 underscore. And with that, dear listeners, we come to the end of tonight's tale. What strikes me most profoundly about Arabella and Gabriel's story is this truth. The deepest loves are often born not from grand passions, but from quiet partnership. Sometimes love grows from mutual respect, from showing up each day, from allowing someone to see you at your most vulnerable and choosing them all the same. It's a love built on honesty, on shared burdens, and on choosing to see one another for who you truly are. If you found something in this story that resonates with you, I would be so grateful if you would share it with someone who might need that little spark of hope tonight. Until next time, dear listeners, may your hearts be light, and may your own love stories bloom, quietly and beautifully, in the garden of your lives.